the media descended on Bradford, where this view appeared unanimous.
He's a devil, the true devil himself come to life.
How many people do you think feel like that?
We all feel like that, all of us. We are true Muslims, and you are true Christians. You will do the same as we are going to do. If I get the chance, or any one of my colleagues get the chance, we will definitely do what the Ayatollah says.
We think that until he is dead, we won't leave him.
I have not come across anybody who disagreed with the fatwa. I mean, I don't disagree.
In fact, to say that you didn't support the fatwa at the time was almost as if you were betraying the Prophet himself. You were unwilling yourself to be counted. It was almost, if you didn't support the fatwa, there was something wrong with you, that, your faith was lacking.
In reality, many Muslims didn't support the fatwa, but few dared to speak out.
We should not be threatening him with violence, because it's giving us the wrong image, and that is not an image we want.
Because it's up to God what punishment should be given. I don't think anyone can claim that he should be killed or anything like that.
Imam Khomeini was acting totally outside the religion of Islam. There is absolutely no support in the religion itself for Imam Khomeini's fatwa.
But many Muslims now saw the Ayatollah as the great defender of Islam against the West.
The timing is interesting. I mean, if there was a theological point to make and it was purely theological, you would have made it much earlier. You also have to say, why was it this particular book? There were many other insults that have been thrown at Islam which have not received this sort of treatment. And that cannot be understood outside the political manoeuvrings that were going on in Iran at the time.
The hardliners in the Iranian government had been trying to block the recent rapprochement with Britain.
It's clear that a number of people among the more hardline elements within the regime had decided to draw his attention to the book. It was a way in which Ayatollah Khomeini could keep some of the more hardline elements within the country happy. And it also had the effect, of course, of diverting some of the attention away from domestic difficulties and turning this into a sort of an international incident that the Iranians could focus on.
Yesterday, the Ayatollah Khomeini said Mr. Rushdie and everyone involved in the publication of his book should be murdered. Now, one of the Ayatollah's aides has offered £1 million to anyone who will do it.
The crisis was escalating by the day. British diplomats in Tehran were told that a national day of mourning was underway to mark the deaths caused by the protests.
Yes, the Foreign Ministry said there'll be a demonstration, but don't worry about it, it'll be dispersed fairly quickly. How many people did I say? Well, a few hundred, they said. Not a bit of it. We heard this extraordinary noise. It's a wave of sound which starts to build up. It's the sound of 10,000 people marching together, all singing the same songs, in a very aggressive way. And when they arrived at the embassy, there was a lot of stone throwing and various diversions. And the BBC came on the line and said, what's going on out there? Are you all right?
It is a very noisy demonstration, and a certain amount of rubbish has been thrown at the embassy, but so far no attempt has been made to break over the embassy walls. There's quite a bit of passion, but I would say that it's not growing at the moment.
The demonstration went on, and eventually I got fed up and rang the Foreign Ministry and said, look, you've had your fun and games, would you please send the demonstrators home? And not long after that they did start to disperse, which demonstrated that they were totally under the control of the government.
Playwrights and authors are among those deeply worried. Today, a group of them handed a petition to Mrs. Thatcher.
I went to number 10 with Harold. They wouldn't let us in. They just sort of opened the door and we shoved a note through the door saying, don't hurt our friend.
We urge you to denounce both the Ayatollah's command and the campaign of intimidation against Rushdie in this country, and to take up the matter with the government of Iran and Muslim leaders and organizations.
Within days, writers and human rights activists would launch a campaign to get the fatwa lifted and defend the right to free speech.
The feeling was that unless we actually held a line somewhere, unless we made it abundantly clear that though these religious fanatics, wherever they came from, were making a statement about what their beliefs were, we should be equally strong in making a statement about what our beliefs were, i.e. that, you know, freedom of expression is the cornerstone of democracy and had to prevail.
Worried about upsetting the recent diplomatic progress with Iran, the Foreign Office played down the affair.
Plainly, one must be very deeply concerned about events of that kind, but one has to try to maintain a sense of perspective and impress upon the other country the possible harm that can be done by incidents of this kind.
In fact, the Foreign Office was totally taken by surprise.
I'd never heard of Salman Rushdie. I was just about to spend the weekend with a friend in Staffordshire, and I think I got the book sent up there, so that I was able to see it. Well, I went through it, looking to get the flavour. I couldn't begin to tell you what the storyline was, and I read enough of it to wreck the weekend, but be in a position to answer questions about it to some extent. I could see that it offended people, and Muslims are not the only people likely to be offended by it.
February 1989. Special branch officers are with me round the clock. I am not to use my own car anymore. It is locked away. I am driven in armoured Jaguars. The windows don't wind down because they're over an inch thick. We stop for petrol, and I go to the toilet, and every head in the gas station turns and stares. We stay at a country hotel. They say things will be sorted out soon, and then I can go home. We go for a drink at a pub, and people come up to me and grasp my arm and say, "Are you all right?" They say to the police, "Look after him." I am very touched.
In London, Iranian diplomats were summoned to the Foreign Office to explain the Ayatollah's action.
I remember them saying, "Why are you making such a fuss about this? This is just one of our apostates, and we have to kill him. I mean, what's the problem?" And that was a problem for us. They were perfectly capable of saying, "Oh, that murderer who came and killed him, we didn't send him." And in what sense did they not send him or send him? They'd created the atmosphere in which that person would have come.
The Iranian representative agreed to a rare television interview to set out his government's position.
The chargé, Mr. Basti, sat down and was very genial, cordial, welcoming, anxious to discuss it, because he was genuinely, I think, very puzzled by our reaction. I suppose I went for him.
Do you understand that we do not regard it as civilized to kill people for their opinions?
Well, you may have different version of defining civilization, defining democracy, for example. You say that in your country, anyone is free to express his opinion.
That is the bedrock
That's
of
very
what
good.
we believe in.
That's very good.
Just as the Quran is the bedrock of what you believe in.
Hold on.
I probably did commit one of the minor crimes of the frontman interviewer. I probably did let my own opinions show.
If you offend against that, the offence to us is very great.
Of course, if that is the logic, so the same right is reserved for any person, a head of state, religious figure, to give his opinion freely, without any intimidation, without any fear from anyone.
But the Ayatollah's opinion is a command.
Well,
his opinion was that Mr. Rushdie should be put to death.
Well, that is an opinion.
He stuck to his view that we'd all got it quite wrong, that the old man in Tehran had simply expressed a view. And, of course, it wasn't a command at all, which it's a bit like who will rid me of this
turbulent priest, isn't it?
The streets of Tehran this morning were filled with crowds taking up the cry for Salman Rushdie's life. Their posters gruesomely disfigured, their demands all too obvious.
Then came a sign from Iran, from the moderate President Khamenei, of a possible way out.
He told the crowd that while Mr. Rushdie was a wretched man with no choice but to die, he could admit he made a blunder, apologise, and possibly then be pardoned. Foreign Office sources concede this does offer a glimmer of hope.
The following day, Rushdie duly issued an apology.
I profoundly regret the distress that publication has occasioned to sincere followers of Islam. He goes on to say that in a world of many faiths, it was a reminder that we must all be conscious of the sensibilities of others.
A day later, Ayatollah Khomeini weighed in with his unequivocal response.
Even if Salman Rushdie repents and becomes the most pious man of all time, the Ayatollah said, Muslims should employ everything they've got to send him to hell.
Within days, the European community had withdrawn all its ambassadors from Tehran. Britain called back its diplomats and asked Iranian envoys to leave London, in what they hoped would be a temporary measure. After a few weeks in Tehran, a disappointed Nick Brown, along with his colleagues, was on his way home.
When I arrived, of course, I could not have expected any of this. I was looking forward very much to going back to Iran and having a useful job to do there. And I believe that we could have done a very useful job. Of course, recent events unfortunately prevented that.
An atmosphere of intimidation flourished. In London, the newscaster Peter Sissons turned up for work as usual, only to find himself ushered into a meeting with his editor and a posse of special branch police officers.
They very gravely told me that I was now at risk and a very serious threat had been made against me, and they showed me the telex that ITN had received, which made it quite plain that the fatwa extended to me and that I was to be killed. My reaction was, well, you know, that's a bit over the top, isn't it? You know, I'm just doing my job.
For the next 6 weeks, Sissons would experience at first hand Rushdie's own predicament.
One night we pulled away from ITN, and I always used to look behind to see if anyone was following us. And as we pulled away from ITN to take me home, a black limo followed. And it must have been on my tail for about 5 miles before we got down the Old Kent Road and it turned off. But by God, I was wetting myself during that time, just wondering who on earth is that, because it was never left our rear bumper.
End February 1989. I haven't written for a few days because things have been very tough. It's clear that there will be no quick fix. The TV is full of bloodlust. I'm not at the hotel anymore. I am in this unnameable place. There is weaponry everywhere, and by my side is a panic button that I am to hit if anything worrying happens. It is very, very cold. I can't go home. People have gone there for me and brought out clothes since I left with nothing but what I was wearing. I'm able to make a few phone calls, but I can give nobody the number and must not answer the phone if it rings. We do not know what horror may be coming our way.
Britain was still trying to save its relationship with Iran. The Foreign Secretary, Geoffrey Howe, went onto the BBC World Service to distance the government from the book.
The British government, the British people, had nothing to do with the writing or the publishing of Satanic verses. We're not promoting the book. We don't agree with the views it expresses. The book, as I say, is offensive about our government and about our society, and we resent that. We understand why people of the Muslim faith, which we respect, resent what is said about their faith in the book. So all those things surely make plain that there is a huge distance between ourselves and the book.
Well, one didn't want to give him a vote of thanks. We thought the same as many other people. Here is a man who comes from a world of which this is part, and he must have known more than anybody else the likely impact of what he wrote. So one was bound to say he must have realised this was going to happen.
There was nothing he had done to create that situation. People asked time and time again, did he not expect this? I mean, it's been something that's unprecedented. It was a set of circumstances globally that came together, which he didn't have in mind in the 5 years before that he was writing the book. It wasn't a grassroots uprising. It was a political construct, and Salman was a pawn in that game.
In any event, Geoffrey Howe's appeal fell on deaf ears. 5 days later, Iran formally broke off relations with Britain. The prospects for the hostages were bleak.
We realised that that was it, that any hope that we thought we had just gone. And it felt to me like we were in a worse position than we were even at the start, because things were worse between Britain and Iran now than they were right at the beginning.
The guards were talking about it, and some of the really hardline guards were saying, yes, hooray, this man, Rushdie, must be killed, we would love to go and do it ourselves. This obviously was pretty bad news for me.
Well, I must say...
Unknown to Cooper, on the same day as the fatwa, Iran had decided his sentence. The details were later revealed to him by the prison governor.
He said, Cooper, I shouldn't really tell you this, but I think it's good if you know your sentence. And I said, yes, I'm dying to know. It's 3 years now. And he said, it's death plus 10 years of jail. So I said, well, which comes first, Governor? And he said, very good point. You've been a very interesting person for me to talk to. I'll write on your file, keep him for 10 years, and then you hang him.
In Beirut, Terry Waite's captors ended his stint in comfortable quarters.
They came in, and instead of going home, went back into normal hostage accommodation for about another few years, with no explanations, none whatsoever.
2 Muslim clerics who urged restraint in the Salman Rushdie affair have been shot dead inside Belgium's biggest mosque tonight.
The fatwa had claimed its first casualties. The moderate leader of Belgium's Muslims and his deputy were killed after the leader spoke out against the fatwa on television. Rushdie's first months in hiding were marked by renewed threats against his life. He moved house 57 times. He usually didn't stay in one place for more than one night.
Nobody could put up with that kind of stress, that kind of pressure, and being in that position. And I think he became paranoid. And indeed, you would be paranoid if you genuinely knew that Iranians with guns were chasing after you.
There's a lot of people that have to be involved in every procedure that he would do. You know, when I was with him, then that would involve me as well. And 15 people every time you go out, and 4 cars, and some of them bulletproof and armoured. It does mean that the places you're living in become kind of like a prison. And that, I think, was very, very hard for him to deal with, and is what would often get him down.
Rushdie's friends rallied round to try and cheer him up, with a series of highly secret dinner parties.
Salman at that first dinner party was in a bad state. He was frightened, he was worried, he was confused, he didn't know who his friends were. I spent enormous sums of money on these dinner parties. I do remember that because it was so also sort of nervy.